I welcome you all to the final provost conversation on teaching and learning for this semester, and actually this academic year. Our conversationalist today will be speaking on an important topic, and when I look at this audience, this is an important topic for you. At the same time, I think he's going to give guidance to the faculty. As we work with the doctoral students to prepare them for their futures, are we doing all that we can to help them publish and present? The discussion will be led by Dr. John Ford, Professor of Marketing and International Business, and Eminent Scholar. Now, I must say, if I was introducing him to the College of Business faculty, I would say that is all I have to say. But since many of you may not know about his accomplishments, let me just say a few things. He's the director of the PhD program in Business Administration for the Strome College of Business. He is the executive editor for the North America for the Journal of Advertising Research, a leading journal in marketing. And he also serves on the editorial review boards for 10 other advertising journals. He is truly an advertising guru. But not only this, because he's the editor and a member of the board of editors for 10 journals, he can give all the insights you need in publishing or perishing. He is a distinguished fellow of the Academy of Marketing Science, has won a number of Best Paper Awards, he's published 2 textbooks, and he's the author of a number of book chapters. Today, he's going to talk to us about how we can make our PhD candidates more competitive by encouraging them to publish. By the way, I have left out a few things for him, which you guys don't need to know. As an interim dean of the College of Business, I can certainly say that it has been a pleasure working with him. He's truly a distinguished researcher and a professor. So without undue delay, Dr. Ford, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, let me set the stage by telling you that I was trained at the University of Georgia, and maybe what gives me my orientation towards doctoral students was based on my experience with my major professor at Georgia. And he gave me so many advantages in many ways that helped me in my career that I would not be where I am today without him. And I've always kind of taken that way that he was with me and tried to be that way with my doctoral students. And I think it works quite well. You know, if you're a faculty member here, I hope you'll listen. My worry is that faculty have certain impressions about how to deal with doctoral students that may be driven by their experience as a doctoral student. And part of the problem with that is that some programs, and this is maybe particularly true in some of the upper echelon institutions, where there is this feeling that doctoral students may not be normal life forms. And you know, the unfortunate thing about that is that, and I have for the last 15 years worked with the Academy of Marketing Science to give doctoral students all the chances that they possibly can to feel comfortable in an academic setting and to know what it takes to interview with potential employers down the line, all of these things that maybe because I was treated so well by my major professor, maybe I feel that that's something that I should pass along. But I certainly urge any faculty member to deal with their doctoral students as a colleague, because let's face it, we're training our future leaders in our disciplines. And so what we have to make sure is that they get the right way of looking at things. And I think if you treat them badly and treat them, you know, as though, you know, maybe the things that they're asked to do are things like going and picking up laundry and moving boxes. And, you know, and I'm actually heard of situations like that. It's absolutely ludicrous. That's not what we should be using our doctoral students for. So I hope for the doctoral students, I give those of you who are doctoral students a chance to really understand what can be possible if your faculty members are open to these kinds of things. But I can't guarantee that that will happen. I hope that a number of faculty members will take some of the comments, and of course if this is spread throughout campus, then the hope is that many will hear these words and hopefully take them to heart. Let me give you some kind of background. For me, the important thing is setting the foundation. So what does that mean? It means, first of all, okay, treat them as colleagues. And that also means accessibility. One of the things that my doctoral students tell me when they come back from consortia and things like that is, you know what I'm hearing is that other faculty members don't make time for their doctoral students. Well, it's a privilege to work with doctoral students, to mold and shape, to help put people into the discipline. It's a tremendous honor to be able to do that. And so one of the things that it's our obligation is to set the stage and give you all the things that you need to be successful. So what we need to be doing is asking you to do the things that will help you to get published. And that's the most important thing I can say. Old Dominion University is getting more and more and more notoriety over the years. We're getting known. I mean, I lecture all over the world. I just came back from 3 days at Villanova University earlier this week. Everybody knows, you know, in my discipline, they all know Old Dominion University, and that's great. But part of the problem is if you're looking at a doctoral candidate who's coming out of Old Dominion University and somebody who's coming out of Stanford, you know, the problem we have is that there's a comparison, a pedigree consciousness that happens there. But guess what? One of the things that I've found out, just like all of my colleagues have found out, is that with publications in hand, you're not just potential any longer. And one of the things that I find, and I see this all the time, I see doctoral students coming out of the top programs in the country who have never published anything or are maybe going to publish something. Now, when you compare that to a proven track record, which is what someone can show the university that they're going to, I'll tell you what, I would rather take that proven track record any day over potential, because I've seen people get burned by potential all the time. And so I want my doctoral students to have every advantage, and that means to get published before they leave Old Dominion University. And so my job is to help that happen. And that's what my goal is, to set the stage for that. Now, one of the things that you realize that as a faculty member, we don't have a whole lot of time to do all the different things that we want to do. So doctoral students become great sources of time saving for us. And one of the things that I always like to do is say, you know, I maybe give my doctoral students a chance to learn how to do things like doing a literature review. Every single class, I teach 3 classes in our program, and every class that I teach, they have to write literature reviews in those classes. Well, why is that important? Because every single academic article has a literature review in it. And so if they've got some comfort at doing that, then it really helps them when they're on their own trying to publish work. But they shouldn't have to be on their own. If they're my doctoral student, I should work with them to get them started and get them out into the discipline with some work, so that some publications, so that they can go off on their own later on. But I still have working relationships, by the way, with students that graduated from here 20 years ago that I'm still publishing with, that I enjoy publishing with. So, you know, these things are lifelong relationships that you can build. But what I'm trying to get at here is that there's an enormous savings for me to have my doctoral students do work for me, do lit reviews and things. But here's the thing. I've had colleagues who didn't give them any credit for that, and who use that work in their own publications. That's unethical. If they did the work for you, they need to be a co-author on that paper. There is no question about that. And one of the things that I see happen, and this is another side of things that can be problematic, is that when a dissertation is done, if the faculty members were instrumental in the creation of that dissertation, then they have the right to be at least on the first article that comes out of the dissertation. So there is an ethical flow here that's really important between the students and the faculty. And those rules should be set early on in the process. So one of the things that we try to do is we try to set the stage for what research means, what the responsibilities are, all of these things early. So I teach a class in the history of marketing thought and philosophy of science. And in that course, which is the first semester in there in the program, I read basically the riot act to them in terms of what their ethical responsibilities are. But at the same time, I also make it very clear that we're now going to develop collegial relationships, and I think that's important to set the stage. They need to be co-authors, so that's one thing that I'm very, very concerned about. And of course, as I've said, the only thing that's important for them, really, is to show that they have the ability to publish. Now, setting that foundation. All right, one of the things that I do in my classes, I make every one of them write a series of literature reviews. Now, doing that, obviously, what they've got is a foundation at that point. And what's kind of interesting is that if you have a large enough class, and one class I teach has 14 PhD students in it, it's International Marketing Theory. And in that class, because we require all of our PhD students in business to take an international business cognate, it gives me a chance to have a variety of different approaches used to developing literature reviews. So they get in the habit of finding the value in a literature review for academia, and that value is in being able to write up a series of research propositions that come out of their synthesis of the literature. And if they do that, one of the things that's kind of neat is that if you're going to work with them on a paper, that's part of the paperwork that's already done for you as a faculty member. So there's a really synergistic relationship in that case where a lot of your time that you would have needed to do that has now been handled. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't have the responsibility of going through it as a faculty member and making sure it's in proper form and it says what it needs to say. But the point is that's really saved you time having them do that. But it's really inappropriate for you to then take that as your own when they wrote it and put this all together. So what I always try to do too is have them, when they finish those lit reviews, I do thorough reviews on these things, hand them back, show them all the different things, because I review for 11 different academic journals. So when you do that kind of thing, you're always in the mode of trying to improve. The goal of reviewers is not to decimate. The role of reviewers is to improve the work to the point where it's publishable. That's our role. And so if you can do this for your doctoral students, and I always tell my doctoral students, hand me your papers. Let me be a first set of eyes to go through these. It adds work to me, but it's part of my responsibility if I'm going to do this job for them. So I will then read those papers and then go through them as I would for a journal. Now, what that does is it gives them a feel for what this kind of work requires, and therefore what they need to shore up. And what I try to get them to do is get to the point where they can then submit that to a conference. And if they can present at a conference, I've found that that makes all the difference in the world for doctoral students. If they can interact with academics that they've read, and they see that they're human beings and they're approachable, I have just seen light bulbs go on every time doctoral students go to conferences. And it's just amazing to me. And I've had colleagues, very well-respected colleagues, come up to me and say, I really like that doctoral student. Now think of the exposure that you've just gotten, right? And that's before you have a chance to even enter the interview process, right? So if they start to get to know you as an academic long before you've sent your vita in and now joined into a pool of 100 other vitas hoping to stand out, guess what? You're already miles ahead of the competition. So getting the exposure, going to a conference, is a first step in that process. And what I always say is take the reviews that you get from the conference, then go to the session, listen to the comments of the academics in that session, and learn from that to the point where maybe you can shore this up and then think about submitting it to a journal. So the normal process is paper for class, conference, journal in that case. So there's a progression that's involved in that way. As I've said, once they get the bug, and it really is an amazing bug, then they'll want to go again. And they'll also realize that if they have a question about something, they can ask. Because I've had people come up to my doctoral students and hand them their business cards and say, if you got a question, if they found out they could talk to them about a particular subject, and they were interested in a subject that they were also interested in, there's this idea of, hey, call me. if you got a question, I'd be glad to answer it. What that's led to in some cases is collegial relationships, where leaders in the field are now working with doctoral students that are just out in the discipline. So tremendous synergies that are possible in all of that. And of course, just getting the chance to hear the feedback from scholars is always incredibly valuable. Now, what I always try to do is explain the research process. I teach the philosophy of science, but frankly, it's very important that faculty members are mentors, that they take the students by the hand, because to a certain extent, students aren't going to pick this up unless we go out of our way to address these kinds of issues. And I find that some are so esoteric in the way they approach things, they're not practical enough for doctoral students to say, here are the pitfalls to watch for, here are the ways to approach research, here are the things to think about. And so what is really important in all that is to let them see how you work as an academic. How do you develop ideas and understand how you come up with that next research project and paper? Because if you can show them the logic and all this, and this is what I always try to do, is say, here is my progression that I go through. And it's not perfect by any means, but it's at least a model that they can start with and say, here's how I logically extend what I'm doing so that I can build credibility for myself in an area of my discipline that'll allow me to get that notoriety that will allow me to get tenure and promoted to eventually full professor. So it's really important to kind of set that stage and explain what it takes. Because one of the things that's very difficult, and I will actually take my doctoral students and show them reviews that I have received back on my papers. That's quite an experience. And when they see what I have to go through as an author, this is a particularly valuable experience, because you don't realize, you think as a doctoral student that you know your subject so well that there aren't going to be faults in all of that. And you realize, of course, what the job of the reviewer is to look for the flow, the logic. Did you have the nomological net built? In other words, the theoretical foundation tightly built. That's where most of the articles that I see are weak, by the way, is in that theoretical foundation. Not to mention the fact that writing styles are important, that methodological issues are important, and so on and so on. But the issue is that if you see what it took to get to a revision, a second revision, a third revision, and realize, and I've shown them in some instances, first step, initial draft, the reviews I got, the first submission, the reviews I got back on the submission, showed them then how I came up with a revision, showed them how I step by step responded to all the reviewer comments in that, put this all together, showed 2 iterations, 3 iterations, and then showed how that paper was accepted finally. They got a much better feel for what this process is all about. Where I lose doctoral students is if their egos get in their ways. And I have to temper that as best that I possibly can by saying, I don't like to get rejected either. But we use it as a learning experience, right? And I have to tell you, I've been published at very high levels, but I've also been turned down. And so the issue is you learn from that. You pick up from your mistakes so that you don't make those mistakes again. So I've always found that taking them through, explaining the process is valuable. And and I'll do it with a group of 3 in a cohort. I won't necessarily do it each individual by themselves, although whoever starts to work with me directly, I will do that for them. But even in a class setting, this is something that faculty can do, but they think about all they're going to do is follow the syllabus and never give any practical benefit to the students at the same time. I always try to bring in, my philosophy of how do you get published, how do you play the game, all of these things. So the more that you can do to help your doctoral students, the better you're preparing them for dealing with what they're going to face later on, and the more that you're giving them a competitive advantage once they try to go through this interview process. Here's one thing that bothered me, and when I was at my program, I had a major professor first who was a grand old man from the discipline, and he wanted me to do what he thought was interesting. That is not the way we should ever approach this situation, ever. Because the point is, a dissertation is a monstrous amount of work. And if you, as an individual approaching the dissertation, aren't passionate about it, then it will become an enormous pain in the neck and a hurdle to get through, which will not help you towards the end, towards your career at all. It'll become an irritant more than anything else. And what I found is that my feeling on what's important, I can help shape, but I'm not going to tell a doctoral student what they have to study. That is not my job. Their job is to come to me with their interests, show me what their thinking is worth pursuing, and then I can help shape that for them. But it's the PhD directors who look at the student and say, here's what I want you to study. That's a mistake. And frankly, I hope people aren't doing that. But unfortunately, as academics, we get egos at times. And we start to point to the fact that, hey, we know what's going on out there. And the problem with that is that you're a sample size of one. And that's always dangerous from a methodological standpoint. And we're all affected by what we call self-reference criterion, which means that not everybody looks at things the exact same way we do. So, yes, you can help shape, but the doctoral student, it should be more of an MBO type process, which is management by objectives, which is the idea there that there's a give and take and a negotiation process that goes on between the student and the faculty. So that you get to the point where you've got a topic that you really like, you think there's enough to it, and then you get the okay to pursue that topic. All right. It is important, obviously, every single institution. We don't do a good enough job at this, and so this is something else that we also have to take on, and that is that we don't prepare everyone well enough for teaching. We throw them in the deep end. My first teaching assignment was 179 Principles of Marketing students at the University of Georgia. My daughter's at the University of Georgia in economics was 329 students. Now, that's a pretty big first step in the process. But obviously, if you can't teach, no university is going to want you. But if you do a reasonably good job, that's going to be what they're going to hope for, right? So what we have to do is we have to keep an eye on our doctoral students and make sure that their teaching is not problematic. If it is, we have to kind of remediate with them to help them. But this is where the comments you get back from the students, and unfortunately when you don't require students to fill out evaluations, what ends up happening is we get the very bad and the very good. And so they kind of wash one another out, but we can learn from comments on the things to improve, and it is important that we kind of look over our shoulder, make sure that the doctoral students are getting. Now, there's a GTAI, the Graduate Teaching Assistant Institute, that we have all of our doctoral students go to, as all of you who are doctoral students have probably had to go through that if you're going to teach for us, and certainly it is valuable to get that teaching experience. But the key is going to be to separate you out from everyone else is what can you do for us in terms of research? Because what we're finding is that even teaching schools are finding more and more pressure to publish. And so it's going to be important that everybody get that ability to understand how to do research, and so that we have to balance the two. All right. Well, to give you a little bit of background, we started our program in 1989. Obviously, what was really going to be important for us was to build a track record from that program. So we had to make sure that those students got a chance to get their CVs bumped up enough so that they would stand out. And we've been very lucky with that. We've had a lot of publications from our doctoral students. And that does get them through the clutter. They often can get noticed by people that wouldn't notice them otherwise because of that. And so it's very important that we keep that going at all times. But here's the thing. It's also important to do things like student projects. In other words, teaching a class and having a group of students do community service projects and things of that nature becomes really important, because another side to being successful as an academic in a faculty is being aware that you're part of a community and therefore doing service to your community, as well as publishing your research and teaching in your classes. And so if we get an opportunity with classes that you're teaching as a PhD student, and we certainly in our college will use them in courses where they can do these kinds of projects with local community. Services classes, as an example, can do what's called a blueprinting project. And what can they do? They can do it for the Virginia Symphony, the Virginia Opera, the zoo, all of these kinds of things. Every class I've taught in that regard, I've had local projects done for the community. And in each one of those cases, student teams, that's something that you can put on their resume, which helps them get hired, but it also gives the PhD students teaching those classes experience doing some things that will also be seen as incredibly valuable when they enter their faculty position. Now, I also feel that it's important. Here's another thing that I do for my doctoral students. Being an editor of a journal, can give them an opportunity to get some experience with reviewing, right? So what I'll do is, I will, and it's not just for my journal, it's actually for the other journals that I do reviews for. What I'll do is I'll give my doctoral students an article and say, okay, take a shot at doing a review of this article. Get some experience doing this. What they'll do is they'll turn it back to me, and when they turn it back, I show them the review that I wrote. And at that point, they can compare between what they wrote and what I wrote. And if you do this a couple of times along the way, they get a pretty good feel for it. Because another way that you're valuable to your discipline is if you can review for academic journals. And what people don't realize is that as a newly minted faculty member, you can ask journals if they'll let you review. What's the harm to the journal? I do this all the time for the Journal of Advertising Research. Now, I'm not going to put them on the editorial review board, but I use them as ad hoc reviewers. And once a year, we thank our ad hoc reviewers, right? And what I've done in the past to help my doctoral students is I've actually included them, the ones that were towards the end of their careers, as reviewers for conference papers, right? They're getting an experience with this. They're getting a chance to see what it takes, right? And I'm allowing them to review the papers without me overriding them in that case. So they got some real responsibility in that case. But it's a really helpful experience to see what it's all about. And so what I feel is kind of important is give the students a chance to see what reviewing is all about, what it takes to get, and this also helps them because they see what it takes to make for a better and stronger article in the long run. So that kind of helps put things together for them. So how do you act as a mentor? Well, give the chance to review, see what they do with all of that. Show them, what it takes along the way. How you get a rejection, how do you deal with that rejection? What are the different options that you're going to face in that case? Another thing that's important for me is not to be inaccessible. And so being accessible allows students to come in and bounce ideas off. This is the thing that actually, this is a lot of fun, where you have a whiteboard and the student comes in and just tries to discuss what is meaningful to them, trying to justify the topics that they're interested in. It's a wonderful kind of mental, exercise to go through this and let them talk, let them try to justify, talk them through the different angles from a research standpoint, looking at all the different constructs and variables that are involved, and try to model it all out. And the more accessible that you are, the more that the doctoral students will get a chance to shape a topic towards maybe a dissertation that will be helpful to them. And if they know early on what they're passionate about, by the way, what you can do is you can structure the lit reviews and work that they're doing in other classes so that they can build on the topic area to the point where by the time they get further along in the program, they have a very large lit review already built in that area that now gives them a pretty solid foundation in that area to build a reasonable dissertation topic out of. Looking for the holes that exist in the discipline. But if you're accessible at least, they can come in and bounce those ideas off and maybe get some shaping that will help them in that case. But giving them an audience is not the way to do that. It's being accessible on a regular basis. Giving them a chance, and this is something that we're doing more in our college, but we need to do it even more than we do, and that is giving them a chance to present their work in a faculty setting. So we have a Dean's Conference series that goes on Friday afternoons from 12 to 1:30. And what becomes really important is that the doctoral students every so often get a chance to present their work to faculty, with the idea that hopefully the faculty are going to give them constructive feedback on those papers. That's really important, and giving them a chance to present. One of my doctoral students just recently got a job. We put him through his paces by taking the marketing faculty and sitting with him and running mock interviews with him. If you haven't had the chance to do that yet, you have no idea how stressful the interview process will become. And when you do it this way, you realize that it takes a lot of the stress out of that process, because you've already gone through a series of questions, the likes of which would be the kinds of questions you'd get. I mean, I've gone through this process probably 30 times hiring faculty members over the years, right? So when you go, you know, I know backwards and forwards how the process works. But what I also see is what doctoral students do that make them more successful in this process. And the kind of information that the ones that have done their work, if we can look at them and give, and obviously take from that, tell our doctoral students how to prepare, how to be able to present themselves in an effective way. Think about the advantage that gives them when trying to get a job later on, which is then the measure of the success of our program. And if we can't place them in good schools, then we're not doing a very good job as a doctoral program at all. But all of these things add to the value of the student. And it takes time, and some faculty I hear complain all the time about, yeah, I'm doing all this with my doctoral students, but I'm not being paid for it. You really have to be paid for everything that you do? It's ridiculous to look at life that way. So why not? And of course, then the question is, how do you personally benefit out of that? I benefit every time I talk to my doctoral students, because they're in some cases challenging me and my view of things. That's the healthiest thing that I can imagine, because you know what happens to all of us? We get pretty staid in our view of things, conservative. And the higher you are in your discipline, the problem becomes you become more of a problem, because the issue is you're not as open to innovative ideas. And so one of the problems we have in the journal level is the fact that, do you really think that the innovative new work is going to come through the top tier journals? Absolutely not. Why? Because the gatekeeper, reviewers and editors, don't like change. And they don't want to have anything come through that's going to question that theory that maybe they proposed 20 years before in their careers, right? But you understand, when you start getting challenged on a regular basis by students who are looking at things a little differently, who have experienced, changes in the theory and in the approach to theory over the years, you start to realize you've been treating some of those theories as axioms, and that's not particularly healthy at all. Is that now it's kind of important, and I work a lot in England, and one of the things that the English students do all the time in their doctoral programs is they use grounded theory. You know what grounded theory is? The idea is taking a step back from what we know, using then induction in that case rather than deduction, and looking at new observations and thinking, does this lead us to the same types of theoretical conclusions that we had 20 years ago in this case? So one of the things that's kind of helpful is to have doctoral students come in and question some of the tried and truisms of each of our disciplines, and you get yourself in a position where you start to realize, you know what? Things have evolved at this point. And if we don't evolve to meet those evolutionary changes, we're going to find ourselves out in the cold. So I do think it's really important that we give students a chance to interact with us on a regular basis because it'll help improve our own view of the world. All right, so mock interviews is extremely important. It does really improve their chances. And every opportunity that you can to stimulate a new opportunity to create an article is particularly valuable for the student. So what do I get out of all this? Okay, well, obviously I get time savings in getting all that work done for me. So I can get more accomplished as a result of the doctoral students. But I give them credit for the work that they've done, and I make them co-authors. And here's the thing, by the way, and I'm a stickler for this, and I'm very, very focused on some of the mishandling of doctoral students in disciplines, with the idea that the order of the authors, if it matters in your discipline, in some disciplines it's all alphabetical no matter what, but in those disciplines that it matters in, the order of the authors should be based on the amount of work done by the individuals involved. And one of the things that I do not believe in, and I'm strongly opposed to this, is putting a faculty member's name on in honor of them when they did very little. That is not right. If the student did the work, the student deserves the credit for that work, not the faculty member. And so the game becomes knowing how much work was actually done, and the order of the authors then reflect that work. That's the only thing that's fair and right for the doctoral students, but I see this being misused all the time. All right? Now, you want your students to be successful. That's going to be a reflection back on you. And so the better job that you do, the more accolades that your program will get, and of course the better you should feel about the fact that you've done a good job preparing them. I have over 40 journal articles that I've written with my doctoral students, 40. And 38, those are all peer-reviewed, and then I have 38 conference proceedings written just with doctoral students. So you get a lot accomplished that way that you wouldn't necessarily be able to accomplish without that. And I'm still writing with those students that graduated many, many years ago. They're great colleagues, and I'm also writing with ones that are 5 years out, that are 2 years out. What does it do? It gives you all kinds of opportunities to publish increasing amounts, too. So it helps in so many different ways. And the biggest way that it helps us, it promotes the university. It gives us a chance to then benefit from the fact that we are giving our students more and more value when they go out. So hopefully all of this really reflects back on the way I was treated. And I hope that, that these kinds of collegial relationships are found throughout the university. I know they're not, and that's part of my problem, is seeing the way that some doctoral students are treated like second-class citizens, and I don't like it. And what does that set up? You realize that if you're not treated well, that probably means that you're going to be that way to future students. So one thing I've done with the Academy of Marketing Science is I have taken over what's called the doctoral colloquium over the last 15 years. What does that do? It gives doctoral students a chance to present papers in what are less stressful situations than true competitive sessions. More and more organizations are shifting to this type of approach. And what it does is it creates opportunities. What we also do is we have special sessions at our conferences where we talk about things like, what does it take when you're interviewing for a position, right? We also talk about things like, we also provide opportunities through employment for different schools. They're going to talk about their different positions that they have. They can come to our conferences and then talk about those positions with potential student candidates at that point. Anything students can do to be known before the actual final process helps them get a leg up perceptually. So it's really important that we give every opportunity for the students to understand what's expected of them as faculty members, what the interview process is all about, and to help them stand out in the crowd. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a view on where I am on all of these things, and I would love questions if anybody has them. And we'll have, Allison will bring over the mic, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Not a good sign if nobody has a
I
question.
have
Okay.
So, John, my question's about working with first-year doctoral students.
Yep.
And so somebody shows up, they've been here 1 week, and you say, well, what are you interested in? And they either say, I don't know, or everything. So how do you kind of work with somebody who's very new when you don't want to give them a topic that you said,
Yeah.
that's not going to work, but you also say, well, go do a lit review for me. And they look at you like, well, what's a
Well,
lit review?
yeah, but you wouldn't, because you wouldn't have them do a lit review until they've got their feet wet at least. So what would be a perfect opportunity for me would be looking at their class schedule, seeing what courses they're taking, and seeing which of those courses might provide an opportunity then for at least to inundate themselves in a particular subject area as a starting point only. Now, if they come in, and some I've had, knew right from the moment they walked in the door what they were interested in. Why? Because they had 11 years of experience in an industry, right? And knew what problems they wanted to solve in that case. We're getting more and more students like that who've had industry experience, who come in and say, well, this is a side of things that and it doesn't mean they won't change over time, but at least that's a starting point in that case. But you're absolutely right. One of the problems is if you've got 2 weeks in a program, what do you know at that point? Well, what you can at least do is say, so far, what intrigues you? And get them talking, and that's what I always do, is just try to get a foundation built. What do you like? What do you find interesting at this point? And realize that may change over time. Yeah.
I'd like to say something. I'm struck by how practical all of this is, which is not necessarily what happens in the classroom. How much of this is classroom and how much of it is
Well,
beyond?
you have to understand where I come from. I am the editor of Journal of Advertising Research. We have an affiliation with the Advertising Research Foundation. One of the things that I'm very, very aware of, and I had a number of years of industry experience before I got my PhD, one of the things I realize is that journals cannot survive on just academic subscribers. In our fields, they can't, because there aren't enough of us to warrant these publications staying in business.
Yeah.
So what do? The Journal of Marketing, the top journal in my field, 75% of the subscribers are practitioners. That means every single article that's written must come up at the end with managerial implications. What does it mean? Because and let's face it, from a business standpoint, one of the things I can tell you is, if we can't solve the problems of business, why do they need business education? Right? So it's a very practical side they have to deal with in this case. So I'm very practically focused because I was in industry for many, many years. But that doesn't mean you can't produce very high quality theoretical advancement in your research. But it also means you better have an idea of how that's going to be useful.
And be applied.
Yeah, and be applied.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other?
Of course, you're over there. Here I come. That's okay. That's fine.
Thank you for your presentation.
Oh, sure.
I was wondering, in sort of the growing world of distance education and distance learning, including at the graduate level, how you would envision sort of a very intensive mentor-mentee relationship like this working if you have a graduate program that is
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't see it. I don't. For a very simple reason. Maybe with the master's level students, yes. Not with doctoral students. And I'll tell you why. They need the interaction. It can't be by Skype all the time. They need to be able to come into your office and talk to you. And they need to get direction on a regular basis. I do not like distance education for doctoral work at all. I understand it can be very valuable at times, absolutely. But if it's going to take the place of any interaction between faculty, mentor, and mentee, then I think that's a terrible mistake.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. My department doesn't have a PhD program, but from my experience, that when I was a PhD, institutions, that the faculty always said, if you can't publish in a top journal, it doesn't matter because no one will read it. So if you have a lower journal, it's better not put in a resume because. So, but I was
Yeah.
just wondering because I graduated from Temple.
Yeah.
And I went to University of Georgia too. But for example, Temple students, when I came out, one of the students had a 4 journal publication. It is top B, but didn't get so great offer. It was reasonably
No,
okay.
you're right. You're right.
So
yeah, this is a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of the issue is how do we give them enough that they stand out and have a chance at places, and that's tough, because if we are not publishing at the A levels, how are we going to expect that our students publish at the A level as well? But my argument would be, but what's really important here is that they get exposure. And so what that may mean, yeah, now maybe if you're looking for a job at Purdue or at Michigan or Michigan State or a place like that, maybe it's going to be a little tougher if you don't have an A-level publication, right, to compete. And that may be true. But what I've also found, and I have students now at American University, at Virginia Tech, you know, at Hofstra, places like that. I've got them all over the place, right? But what they had to do was they had to prove themselves. And that's why I'm saying that proving yourself with a track record, and that might be B-level journals, right, is a whole lot better than having nothing to offer, right? So part of the issue is the A-level journals, and this is a problem we all face, the A-level journals take a whole lot more work than the B-level journals do to get published in. Right. And in my own journal, it's an A-. So, you know, I mean, it's tough, but it's not impossible. But I have a 9% acceptance rate, and I 82% desk reject. So it's a tough haul, but it doesn't mean that maybe, you know, have 2 or 3 journal articles when you come out. Wow. You know, if you can get an A, fine. But again, to me, the more important thing is what can you do for us? And if you have a couple of different journal articles, and I would not concentrate on C level or lower, obviously, but if they're reasonably good quality, then I think you have a pretty good competitive position that you can take. But some of the schools, like I was at Georgia, one of the things about Georgia was they prided themselves on the fact that many of the people who were going through the promotion and tenure process didn't get promoted. What in the world is that for? Why would any place want to do that, right?
Temple was same.
Oh, and you look at this. I was just at Villanova, and they're making all these comments to me about, well, you know, nobody gets tenure very easily. And you're thinking, what is that all about? Is that what this whole thing is about? That you can learn along the way by, you know, basically running out in traffic on Hampton Boulevard, and then, you know, finding that you're going to not get tenure to first place, but maybe the second or third place that you go? Well, I'm not sure anybody benefits from that. But one of the things that I do know, and I talk to people from different universities and different levels of universities all the time, and what they're starting to suggest, however, is that the A-level journals are so few and far between at this point because there's so much work that goes into them, and it takes so many years in some cases to get through that hurdle, that what they're going to see and what they're going to look for are going to be the A- and B+ and B-level journals. And that, it'd be better to have 3 journal articles than 1 that's in revise and resubmit to offer. So I would say a proven track record is better than potential.
I have one more question.
Sure, please.
Because they nowadays my discipline is accounting, but different disciplines would be maybe similar because we wanted to have a unique idea, and also like nowadays like a cross-discipline kind of research is kind of bring a new idea from a different discipline and to try to, you know, if we are in accounting, try to muscle with accounting.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
but I actually don't see so much, and I just wanted to know your opinion about it.
Yeah, the whole interdisciplinary research approach. You know, it's absolutely fascinating. And for me, what I realize, I'm a cross-cultural specialist. So one of the things in international business, and one of the things that I always knew in international business is that you have to be multidisciplinary to understand it and to deal with it in an effective way. So part of the problem now is that you have departments that are structured around very limited interest sets. So part of the difficulty in the promotion and tenure process that comes up is when individuals are coming up against that brick wall. And basically, if you're interested in interdisciplinary, and frankly, the really cutting edge research nowadays is multidisciplinary. Because and let me give you an example. I was trained in quantitative analysis, right? But one of the things I found out within 2 weeks of arriving here in 1985, I did a perceptual mapping study for the hospitals in the area as part of my community service. You can't do quantitative research without doing qualitative research. And so if you think that you're a quant jock and you don't need qual, you're ridiculous. You need both. Multi-methods is really important. But now the problem becomes when you write something up that involves both qual and quant, what do you spend more time on, right? But now what's happening is journals are getting smarter. They're bringing in reviewers who have different training than the ones that they had necessarily before. Ones who understand the benefit of multidisciplinary work. And frankly, what I'm seeing more and more and more of are pieces that are published in top-tier journals that are involving finance and marketing. You know, one of the things that we see happening in economics now and in finance now is they're looking at areas, I mean, what are we in marketing and management? We're social scientists, right? What are we dealing with? Human beings, right? So when we look at all of this, what you start to realize is human minds and perceptions are all important, right? What does that mean? Well, it means that finance is now starting to look at what's called behavioral finance. But finance people are not trained in how to develop questionnaires to go out and deal with getting into the heads of consumers. So they're coming to us and saying, how do we do this? The Journal of Economic Psychology, right? What we're seeing is really important contributions being made cross disciplines. And frankly, what that's doing is it's opening doors in top-tier, very focused journals that are now opening those up to more and more cross-disciplinary research. So I think it's extremely healthy. And that's where real changes are going to happen. Because you know what we're always doing? In marketing and in management, what are we always doing? We're borrowing from psychology, sociology, anthropology, right? All the different disciplines. So part of the issue is where's the new view going to come from? Yeah.
Thank you.
Interesting question.
Thank you. Coming at you.
Hi, I was wondering, what advice do you have for PhD students who aren't getting the support from faculty that you...
Yeah, I know. Well, do you have, that's a very important question. And I'm not going to raise your name. No, it's an important question because how do you get them? Well, here's one of the things that I did, and maybe it was a mistake, but I did it anyway. I switched major professors. I did not like where the first one was going. And so what I did was I went to other faculty members and talked to them. That's always an important step in the process. Because what you may find is maybe you're with the wrong person. And therefore what you need is to find out who's more on your wavelength, who's more going to work with you and help you. And I found that there was another faculty member who was far better. And I published 2 journal articles with him before I even graduated. And that would not have happened with this other faculty member. So it was a tough decision. I didn't like what it meant at the time, but it was by far the best thing that I could have possibly done. Yeah.
Let me make one comment on what you just said. It is your life, and you need support. If, as John just said, if the dissertation advisor or the main professor is not interested in providing you support, you are going to be wasting time. Mm-hmm. And I think by students switching from him or her to others also gives him a message or her a message mm-hmm. that he or she needs to shape up.
Now, the only difficulty is that if that person's the most powerful person
That's
in the
right.
entire...
It is when I was a graduate student, our professor used to tell us very simply that graduate students are the have-nots and the professors are the haves. So it is not that easy to make the switches that John is making these things out to be, but,
No, it's not.
but you have to be creative. You somehow have to say that I'm not really interested in this area anymore. And those professors understand that part of it because we do switch games.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're a first-year doctoral student, you may think, I'm interested in this. But as you take a few more courses, that's not what I wanted to do. So you can use those vehicles to get away from those things.
Yeah. But it is very important that you develop relationships with other faculty and see where there might be a better fit. Sometimes, unfortunately, and Dr. Agarwal's very right, sometimes there's nothing you can do because you're kind of caught in a political trap in that case. And I understand. I was. But luckily, this was another full professor that I switched to who had no worries about alienating the other full professor. So sometimes the status of the individual within the department makes a difference too. But you do have to nurture this very carefully because there is that political aspect to it. But if you're not happy, you know what can happen in that case. And as I said, if they don't let you be passionate, go in the direction that you want to go, then that work's going to be drudgery for you. And you don't want that, especially if this is going to take 2 years of your life to do this.
I have a separate question, but just to piggyback on that, I think it's also helpful to have a mentor outside of your department,
Oh, yes.
if possible, who can help you navigate some of these political issues that as a graduate student you may not be aware of or fully understand because you're sort of learning that in the process. So having someone who's a faculty member, even if they're in a different discipline, as a mentor, sort of an informal mentor,
Yeah.
is a good idea for
No
handling that.
question. And what we do at the Academy of Marketing Science, we give someone who's outside of the university as a mentor to the doctoral students.
Yeah.
So they get a chance to pick somebody who's a particular expert in a field. I do this for other students from other universities. And so there's another voice, and you're absolutely right. And it could be somebody from another department within the same university,
Right.
too, that could be helpful. But it's better if you've got somebody who's in the field, who's not in the university, who might be able to give you some points along the way, tips. Another thing that I do that I would suggest makes sense, I bring in on dissertation committees friends of mine who I know are doing work in those areas from other universities. And frankly, that's really helpful, although we can't pay for them necessarily to bring them in for the dissertation defense and all of those things. But I will say this, it's always good. I would rather have more people on a committee than less because you're trying to make sure that you haven't missed anything when you're doing your dissertation. And so bringing in an expert from another field is very helpful, especially if they're well published, because then the issue becomes, if you have trouble with any of the members on the committee, if they know this person is a whole lot more schooled in it than they are, they're going to step back a bit and let that person have a say.
So I just had one more quick question.
Sure.
Your point earlier about essentially not making a clone of yourself and telling a student what they're going to study is, I think, important. But I was wondering sort of where you find the balance of, a topic that you can advise that student on, because it needs to be enough within your world so that you can competently advise them.
You're right.
So,
and as an editor, I know what we need in journals, right? And so, yes, I would love to see somebody really fired up about a topic that I know has lots of potential. But then the other side of that says, I don't know how long that's going to be the case, right? I don't know how long it's going to take them to finish up. And what I'd rather see is, yes, I can help, I can shape, but if the person starts to tune out, the glassy eyes, then I know this is probably not in their best interest. But then I'll say, now give me a variety of things here that you, at this point in your career, think might be interesting to you. Let's sit and talk about those things and see which one might make more sense for you. The problem is you get faculty members who look at doctoral students and they say, I want to do work in this area, and I want you to work with me in this area. And the problem is, we don't know. I mean, if the student doesn't like that area, Man, that can be awful. I was supposed to do new product development, but with my first major professor, I had no interest in it at all. And I could just see the drudgery that that would involve for 2 years. And I'd been in industry for a long time. I didn't need to take that garbage, right? And that was a little different view than somebody who's 22 years of age coming out. I was 30 years of age in that situation, 32. And I saw these others, fear and trepidation. And frankly, if you're not your own advocate, no one else will be. So that's when you can take a leadership role for your own life. And if you don't, you have only yourself to blame in that case.
Well, with that, I think we're going to bring it to a wrap. Thank you very
Okay,
much, Dr.
thank you.
Ford.
Thank you very much.